Hey, welcome Ruby friends. My name is Jesus Castillo from rubyguides.com. And in this video, we're going to learn some Ruby together. So join me, maybe get some coffee or something, open your editor, your IRB, your terminal with Ruby, hopefully ready to go and install, and let's learn something new. And what we're going to cover today, I thought it would be a good idea to go over some version changes on Ruby because a lot of people aren't familiar with what changes from version to version and they don't know what's available to them. That's new, the new features, right? And why you need to upgrade your Ruby version. Other than when there's a few reasons to upgrade your Ruby version. First, you will want to have the new features, of course, but you also get new methods, which make things easier for you, right? If you have more methods do work, do things for you. So if you have more methods available, means you have to do less work because the methods come with the programming language and already do a lot of work for you, and that's one of the great things of Ruby because it provides a very good base of built-in methods. By the way, feel free to say hi say something in the chat while I'm live and tell me where you're from. I'm from Spain. Broadcasting right now from Spain. It's pretty hot right here in the middle of summer, August 1st. It's pretty hot. I can't even close the door because it gets really hot in here. So there is that. So we have that. We're talking about Ruby versions today. I think that's a good topic to cover, especially since every year the releases are every year we get a new version, usually by Christmas Day, right? So we get new versions, and I believe the next version, if nothing changes, is going to be the 3.0 version, which is a major release, right? When the first number change, we call that a major release. When the second number changes, that's a minor release, right? That's usually, and then we have this other version. I'm not quite remember what the other number is. There is also another number that's not shown here that's called the patch level. So you will see sometimes like 2.6.5 and then it says like P100. That's like the patch level. That's for a release where we fix problems, bugs, errors with within the programming languages or any kind of software without changing the features, right? So that's what the patch level is. In Ruby, you will find it like this -P100 or something like that. So there's that, and when the other number changes, usually we have some kind of features change. So there is that. So new features, new methods, very important, but also improved performance. That's yet another reason. So these reasons to upgrade your Ruby version, right? That's because I see a lot of people running with older versions, and that's not good because then you don't get to enjoy this. I don't have the latest in here. I have 2.6, but the latest is 2.7. But if you are up to like 2.6 or even 2.5, I think that's pretty good. But I see people even run older versions, that's not good because you're missing out on a lot of things. You're missing out on new features, new methods, improved performance, and also Rails requires newer versions of Ruby. So if you want to run a Rails 6, I believe Rails 6 have a requirement of minimum Ruby 2.5 version. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that's what the minimum version. You can even run Rails 6 if you don't have this Ruby version, right? So I think that's a lot of versions. Of course, there's also like security patches and things like that. Also important reason to upgrade your Ruby so you don't have any problems, any security problems, because you need to have more recent releases, right? So that's plenty. I think I hope I gave you plenty of reasons to upgrade your Ruby version to at least, if not the very latest, to at least one before that. So now 2.6, right? And so these are the reasons to upgrade. And you can manage different versions. This is very known by many people, but it might not be in your radar. You might not be familiar with this if you are new to Ruby. And that is, you have version managers. We call this, let me write it down for you. We call this version managers, right? Since we are talking about versions today, might as well cover the topic of version managers. So what is a version manager? Well, basically a version managers is a program that allows you to switch versions, switch between different versions of the interpreter, right? So for example, right here, I'm using a version manager called CH, which stands for Change Ruby, right? This one that font that is very easy, doesn't have any bells and jingles, so however you say that, doesn't have any fancy stuff, it just works for me. So that's CH Ruby. And in here, what you see is the list of the Ruby interpreters. So the Ruby interpreter is the program that actually takes your source code, your Ruby source code that you write, and then runs it and converts it into actually running Ruby code, right? So you could say that this is the programming language implementation, right? This is what actually runs your code. Because the difference, this different, like for example, if you're programming in C, in the C programming language, you don't need, the operating system is interpreter, right? Because C is a compile language, and it produces this in Windows. It produces like the EXI executable files. These are like self-contained, right? They might need like DLLs and things like that. DLLs are dynamic libraries, but for the most part, they don't need a specific. You don't need to install something special or anything different than what comes with the operating system to be able to run this, right? But with other programming languages, like for example Java or PHP or Ruby, all of these, and the vast majority, so almost all of the modern programming languages, and by modern I mean released like the last 20 years, as opposed of C, which is like 50 years old or older than that. Well, all of these newer programming languages are interpreted, which means they don't produce an executable file. You take the source code directly, and then you take the interpreter, which knows how to read the source code, and then directly it runs the code, right? It produces the execution of the program directly without producing like an intermediate file. Well, in the case of Java, you have an intermediate file called what was it called, bytecode, right? With Java, you get something called bytecode, which is like an intermediate file, but in the end, you need the interpreter, right? And that's what we're referring when we're talking about this Ruby program, right? I just wanted to give you this context so you understand the difference from like an exe file that you can run, which usually is built using the C programming language, and something like, by the way, with an exe, you don't have the source code, right? Because the source code is transformed, is compiled into something called machine code or instructions, right? And it's like bits, like ones and zeros, right? Basically, which your CPU, which is the central. Yeah, I know I'm going a bit off topic, but that's the nature of live streams, right? Central processing unit, right? And that's the part of your computer. I know it's very basic, but if you're new to programming, you might not be very familiar with computers, right? So I want to explain these basic things. So the CPU is like your processor, like your Intel AMD, right? Your Intel AMD, that's your CPU, your processor, right? That's what takes all of these binary, these ones and zeros, and then it's an interpreter. Ta-da! Basically, your CPU, your processor, your Intel i7 or whatever you have, or your AMD, if you are more of an AMD person. Personally, I'm more of an Intel person. Ding, 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 ding. Right? And I always bought Intel. I don't know. I think I like it more, not for a specific reason, just like more Intel. Okay. I think you can see that, yes. But yeah, basically what your processor is, what your CPU is an interpreter. But it's an interpreter not of Ruby or PHP or whatever, or even C source code, but of machine instructions, of binary code that encodes for machine instructions. So for the CPU, this 101 maybe means read the specific memory address and find out what's stored in this specific memory address. So if you ever look at a memory address, looks something like that. AF21 BF looks something about like that, memory address, right? Something like that. That's like your typical memory address that you might find, right? What you're doing, the CPU is an interpreter, just like Ruby is an interpreter for your Ruby source code. The CPU is an interpreter for this binary code, these machine instructions, and it knows that, okay, one, for example, it isn't like this exactly, but just so you get an idea, 101 means, okay, read this memory address, which when we're talking about memory, we're talking about RAM, right? Which, as you might know, it means random access memory. So when we say, okay, I have 16 gigabytes of RAM, whoops, forgot the comment. What we're referring to is this RAM, right? Is where we are temporary, is a temporary storage of memory. The computer accesses with these addresses, right? So it's like it has many slots. The memory basically is like it has lots of slots where you can store information, right? And every one of these slots has one of these addresses assigned. So to access what's in one of these memory slots, you need the address, and that's how you store, how the computer stores and retrieves memory from RAM, right? Of course, this happens very fast, and this happens probably millions of times for every second. So all of that just to give you an overview of how all of these things are connected together, because I think it's very important to understand how things are connected together. Do you agree? Let me know if you agree in the comments. Yeah. So there is that. So let's go back to the Ruby version changes. And we have this. So this is my, before we do this, this is my website. By the way, this is my website. It's called rubyguides.com. If you're not familiar with it, rubyguides.com. Okay. And here I made this list of changes. So you can find that in Rubyguides on rubyguides.com/ruby -version-changes. Okay. Before we go back here, I want to go on another little tangent to mention another two version managers. So I mentioned I use chruby, but another one is this very new one, I understand, and that's ASDF. And this one is a multi, you can manage multiple runtime versions. You see that? You can manage multiple runtime versions. And that's pretty cool because it means you can add Ruby. For example, with this, see? ASDF Ruby. And then you get Ruby plugin for ASDF version manager. Personally, I haven't tried this, but I know it's under active development and there are people using it. So if you are looking for an alternative Ruby version manager, well, you have chruby, have RPNB, this one. You also have the more classic, the more well-known, which is RVM, right? But which stands for Ruby Version Manager, but you don't have to use your RVM, right? Did you know that you don't have to use RVM? It's optional. You can use one of the others. You can use chruby, you can use RVM, this one that I highlighted, or you can use ASDF. So which one should you use? It doesn't really matter. You use the one that works for you. That means it's easy for you to use, and it doesn't you don't get any problems with it. Okay. I don't see very much chat interaction today, so if you're watching live, feel free to say something on the chat so I know you're watching and where you're from. What projects are you working on? And we're interested to know what project you're working on. They're related to Ruby or learning Ruby. Okay, so now we can finally take a quick look at version changes. So you can see there are a lot of changes since Ruby 2.0. So Ruby 2.0 was major release coming off Ruby 2.9, right? So the way this went is 1.9 and then we go to the 0, right? So these are the changes, a lot of changes because it was a major release since 1.9. And some of the changes are lazy enumerators, keyword arguments, very helpful, these keyword arguments. UTF-8 as default encoding. So what is UTF-8? Well, it's an encoding. So when you have characters, I have my website address, for example, and these characters are not really characters. They are represented as numbers. Everything ultimately in a computer represented as numbers, right? So these characters have a number associated with them, which we can find out like this. So in this case, the character R, which is the first character of this string, we can find out its ordinal. This is what this means. Ordinal value is 140. But here is the problem with this, is that there is a limit to these numbers. So when we get to like 128, and then there is also extended version of this, which I think goes up to 256. This is called, I believe, extended ASCII. Alright. What does this mean? This means that we can only represent 256 characters in total. And that includes special characters like new lines, the tab key, which is like -t, and other special characters. We can, you see the limit here, only 256 characters. So what about Japanese characters? What about Arabic characters? What about Chinese characters? What about any other characters, Korean characters, or whatever other languages have characters that don't look like English characters, right? It's not R, but it's some kind of symbol, right? I'm sure you have seen Japanese characters before sometime, that they look like little symbols that represent something, and they look nothing like our ABC or R or U or whatever our English characters that we used to, right? So we can't represent those with these many numbers. So what we did, or what people did to solve this problem, in the technological problem, is to create a new standard called UTF-8. I believe the U stands for Universal something something. Let's see. Yeah, no, Unicode transformation format apparently. So there you go. So as you can see in this little image, what we have is a lot more numbers to work with, which allows you to create other a lot more characters. Okay, so this allows you to have Japanese characters, this allows you to have any other characters. We even have emojis encoded within this system. Okay, so that means you can have emojis inside your Ruby strings, and that's thanks to this change that has been made since Ruby 2.0. Okay, so that's the explanation of UTF-8. I thought it was worth explaining because if you're new to programming, you probably aren't familiar with why this exists. Okay. So next we have refinements as experimental. I don't know if they're auto-experimental yet. I think they are, but as talked with some other developers, and apparently nobody uses refinements. I was interviewed for a podcast, and I asked if somebody used refinements, and nobody used refinements. I don't use refinements. Okay, so it's not very important that you know for refinements because practically nobody uses them. But if you want like the Cliff Notes version of what refinements are, is when you want to add features into a class. It's like some kind of module, I believe. So here is I believe this is the problem refinements try to solve. So as you might know, in Ruby we have what we call open classes. What that means is we can take a class that already exists, like the string class, and then you can change it. You can change the string class. So, you know, a string class are already built into Ruby, but because we have open classes, we can change it. However, that's a bad idea. You don't want to be changing built-in classes. Why? Why do you think that would be? Well, because then you're going to run into strange problems when you do that. Especially if you're working with other developers, which expect the string class to behave like the string class in any other Ruby program. If you change it, that's going to be a bit strange, right? Even though it's perfectly possible. So basically what refinements do, if I remember correctly, is they allow you to refine one specific instance of a string, for example. So we can change a specific instance of a string or something like that. Well, if you're interested, just look that up, but it's not very little people use it, so you are not likely to come across this. Okay. We also got a new regular expression engine, as you can see here. What it means is this is more efficient, so this is faster and better, of course. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, what this is you can get patterns. Usually they will be like this, 2 forward slashes, that's the syntax. And you can find patterns. That means I can find if I have numbers, I can extract these numbers. If I had numbers in this string, I could extract them. I can get these numbers, right? That's regular expressions. Oh yeah, that's an interesting one as well. That's another feature, which is %i and capital case I for Symbolise Creation. So let's take a quick look at that. It looks something like that. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, D, D. There we go. So that's how to do %i. it creates a list of symbols, as you can see there. And if I do %w, what do you get? You get a list of strings, okay? So any questions you have so far, let me know while you are watching live. This is the moment to ask questions. When I go offline, which will be soon, then you won't be able to interact with me live, okay? You can just say hi or say, okay, I'm from whatever, I'm from Spain, for example. And we also have in Ruby 2.0, we have a series of interesting methods, like the dir method, bsearch. Oh, bsearch is interesting because bsearch means binary search. Binary search, okay? And we have also module prepend, prepended. This some of you have for metaprogramming, or prepended is a metaprogramming method because it's called a hook. Basically, it allows you to know, it's like a callback as well. Callback. Let me write that down for you. Callback. Hook or callback method. And basically, this is like a notification system. It would allow you to know when a module is prepended. So if you're not familiar with modules, I would recommend to read my Ruby book. I have a chapter dedicated to explaining modules. I have another chapter on metaprogramming. Two very important chapters if you want to learn more advanced Ruby. If you're a beginner, then you don't have to worry about what this prepend is. Oh, and bsearch is binary search, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that. Research, binary search. And this is a very efficient way of searching things. But there is one requirement. For binary search to work, you need a sorted list, okay? Sorted list. If you don't have a sorted list, then you can't binary search. So this is helpful when you have a list that you're keeping sorted and then you want to quickly search. So normally you will do this with a list of numbers. Let's say you have 1,000,000 numbers, million random numbers that are sorted. Then you can very quickly find if a given number is in that list using binary search. Now, one thing we mentioned about this method is I find it hard to use because there are, if you read the documentation, there are like different parameters that you can give it. So that's kind of strange. I find it hard to use. But basically, the concept is this, okay? That's, these three are related, as you can tell. So prepend, prepended, so notice the ed, and also prepended features. Another thing to notice here, if you're paying attention and looking at the screen, is this symbol. You see this like hash symbol? In Spanish, we sometimes call this almohadilla, if you want a Spanish word. Well, this hash symbol or almohadilla represents something. It's not here for nothing, right? Same here. This dot also represents something. So in this case, the almohadilla hash symbol, this means this is an instance method. So let me write that for you. Instance method. And with this means we're dealing with a, what do you think? If it's not an instance method, what does it have to be? Well, it has to be a class method. Because we have these two options. basically. So that's what the hash symbol and the dot means. Okay. Oh, we have a comment from I can hardly read your name. Sorry if I mispronounce it. Says Jaham Franksai. Hi, Jesus, watching from Nairobi, Kenya. Ruby enthusiast, willing to learn. Good. Welcome. Hi. It's good that you're learning. How long have you been learning Ruby? I mean, oof, it's hot right here, pretty hot. Yeah, so that's. We also got some changes where we get arrays instead of enumerators. So these methods used to return an enumerator, now they return an array. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the important changes. There are more changes, but I just picked the most. I highlighted the most important methods right here. Okay. From here we'll go into like Ruby 2.1 to the 2, and I have all the way to 2.7, which is the latest version. As you will see, I also added release dates for the newer versions. You can see release December 2016, December 2017, and December 2018. So that's Ruby 2.6, and this was last year on Christmas. So all of these that have a date, all of this was on Christmas Day. This was when the tradition of releasing in Christmas Day, kind of like a gift to ourselves of Ruby developers is. So there is that. So take a look yourself, because we're not going to be able to go over all the whole list right now. Feel free to go to the website rubyguides.com/ruby. Let me type that for you in the chat so you have access to it. It's rubyguides.com/ruby version changes, so you can check that out. We have Psycho Shepherd. Hey, well, hey, welcome. Hope you having a good day and you're learning lots of Ruby. So that's the link for you. That's the link we're looking at. So Ruby 2.1 we have required keyword arguments, which you might recall that in Ruby 2.0 we got keyword arguments. Well, in Ruby 2.1 we got required keyword arguments. So that further enhances it improves the ability to use keyword arguments. Here's what I mean. If I use let's say, I don't know, bacon, like that, this is a required keyword argument. Okay, you will use it like this. See, if I don't pass anything to method A, it says missing keyword argument bacon, right? So that's a keyword argument, a required keyword argument. So we can have also fruit, and what does a non-required keyword argument look like? Well, let me show you right now. Here it is. It's going to look, I just need a name. It could be like vegetable. and then we can have like carrot, right? So that's optional keyword argument. So now if I do A, it says missing keyword fruit, but notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say missing keyword vegetable because vegetable is not required. So that's what we mean by required keyword argument. Okay. We have a question. Hey Lisa, I just finished Ruby and Ruby on Rails course. I need your advice. How do I know if I'm ready to apply for a junior developer job? Well, my question would be, how many projects have you built? How many projects have you built? Both Ruby only projects and Rails projects. It depends how many projects have you built. Have you learned any about aspect or testing? Have you learned about more Ruby, more advanced than the basic syntax? Because the problem with many Ruby courses that they only teach you very basic things. If you want to do well as a junior developer, you need to go beyond the basics. So for example, you need to be familiar with keyword arguments. You need to be familiar with the different built-in methods, like for example, map, select, inject, many others, right? So that's like the first pass. Also, if you have to explain, have you tried explaining some basic Ruby things to another person that doesn't know them? That's another way to test understanding and to deepen your understanding, to teach to another person. But the most important, make sure that you can build projects and you have some good understanding. You can do some programming challenges as well to find out. I also have a mind map that shows like the basic things that you need to know. I don't have it right here. Basically, you need to be familiar with things like MVC routing for Rails, right? Views, ERB, things like that. You will also need to know some aspect for testing, TDD, testing, basic testing. You need to get anything fancy there. You will also need, of course, the Ruby side, enumerable, maybe a little bit of metaprogramming, but don't get too obsessed with that. So I'm going to add a little bit of metaprogramming to the list. Modules, of course, methods, different kinds of methods, things like that, and build projects. Build, I would say, at least 3 Rails projects, at least 3 non-Rails projects. So that means only using Ruby without any frameworks. You can use gems if you want, but nothing related to Rails. So that will be like my basic. Thank you, Jesus. I'm glad you are the one channel in YouTube that gives knowledge and the opportunity to become better. Nowadays in 2020, no one takes steps to speak about Ruby on Rails. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you are watching and that you find helpful. So that's Ruby 2.1. We got some GC. This advanced. You don't need to know what this is if you're a beginner. But basically, GC means garbage collection. And this refers to how memory is managed, right? How memory is managed. So when you create an object, like a string, when you create a hash, or even a symbol, something like that, all of this requires memory. You don't have to say, okay, I need 40 bytes for this string. Imagine have to set it every time, having to count how many memory you need, having to ask the operating system for that memory, having to free that memory when you no longer need the string. Well, luckily for you and for us as Ruby developers, we don't have to do any of that. C developers, they have to do that. C developers, they have to manage memory themselves, have to ask for a specific amount of bytes of memory, have to remove free memory when they no longer need it. And that leads not only for a lot of work, extra work, it also leads to a lot of errors. Like for example, one typical error that you get in C programs is called use after free, which is when you use a memory address after you already freed it. You already mark it, okay, I don't need it anymore. And then you're going to use it. So that's going to become a problem. But that only happens in C. We don't have to worry about any of this nonsense, okay? Because Ruby handles it for you, right? So that's the what we got here in Ruby 2.1 is a better, more efficient way to do this memory management, okay? By the way, if you like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and enable notifications. Why? Because that will allow you to see when I go live, like this, like today. I don't have a specific schedule, and we also notify when I upload new Ruby videos for you. Okay, that's why you should subscribe if you haven't yet. If you have, well, thank you for your support. And also you should visit my website rubyguides.com and subscribe to the free newsletter. Okay, so Ruby 2.2, we have another improvement to the memory management system, which shorthand is GC, means garbage collection. Basically, that's the memory management system. And it got more improvements in Ruby 2.2. And these improvements lead to major performance increases. That's why it's important to upgrade your Ruby versions, as I mentioned in the beginning of this broadcast. Okay. And these improvements in performance come from this kind of changes, also other changes, not only memory management. And of course, in here we got a few new methods. One of my favorites, it's solve method. It's pretty cool. I have a video on this, very popular video on this very channel. You can find the kernel itself method. I think has a lot of views compared with my other videos. So watch that if you haven't. There is another method, it's called curry. Now this has nothing to do with the food curry or the spice curry. This is actually something called partial. This is quite technical, but it's interesting if you want to investigate more. It's called partial method application. That's what the curry method is all about. I think I have a video about this, but basically this goes with lambdas and procs. If you don't know what that is, again, I have videos. Definitely I have videos for lambdas and procs. Okay, but that's basically what Curry is. Very cool method that allows you to do this partial method application. Basically, what this means is you can call methods with less arguments than they required and add them later. So watch my video or something to understand that better. But that was added in this version of Ruby 2.2. Okay. Yeah, these ones I haven't really used. Neither this. So after that we have like Ruby 2.3. This introduces the frozen strings Pragma, the save and navigator operator, which you can see here. It's well, in Rails you have try, but in Ruby we have, I see we can see an example here. This basically, it's kind of small, I know, but that's what it is. Squiggly hair dog. And also something very interesting is the did you mean gem? Did you mean gem? So what's that? Well, let's say, watch this. I do size. That's fine, right? But if I do size, what happens? Well, that's an error. Why is an error? Because size doesn't exist. Size exists, but size doesn't exist, right? So what happens, because I'm Ruby 2.6 and it has this feature, is Ruby tries to help you by telling you, okay, did you make a typo? Did you mean, that's what's here. Did you mean size? Because basically it has like a list of things that are valid, and it tries to match the closest thing to the typo, and in this case it's right? It says, did you mean size? Yes, I did, and it works, right? So that's what this did you mean gem is all about. Okay, so I think I'm going to call it for now. You can feel free to go over this list yourself and investigate the different methods. Thanks a lot for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and watch, if you want to learn more, watch more of my 100 videos. You can find over 100 videos on this channel about Ruby, and Ruby on Rails. Okay, and also visit my website rubyguides.com, where you will find over 150 articles where you can learn and improve your Ruby skills. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks a lot for your support. I will see you in another video.